There was a man on my block whose skin told a story he could not take back. Ink on his knuckles, up his neck, the kind of markings that in that world are not decoration. They are a record, a resume. They tell other men who you belong to, what you have done, and what you are willing to do. He had worn that record for years before I ever met him, and it did not wash off. Let me be straight with you before I go one word further, because the title of this could give you the wrong idea about me. I was not a gang member. I went in at 18, and I stayed neutral, mostly, on the advice of older men who told me the fastest way to get buried in there was to belong to something. I kept my head down and my business small. So when I talk about a gang member getting a second chance, I am not talking about myself. I am telling you what I watched happen up close on the same block over years to a man who did live that life. And I read the same Bible he did a few cells down, so I saw the 6 verses that turned him from both sides. I served 12 years, most of them on B block. That is enough time to watch a man change slowly, which is the only way it ever really happens. Not in a night, not in a movie scene, slowly and against a lot of resistance, including his own. Let me be careful with something right here. I cannot tell you what was inside that man's soul. I can only tell you what I saw with my own eyes and what he told me with his own mouth. And I am not going to give you anything that could identify him because his story is his, not my sermon prop. What I can give you is the verses and what they did in front of me. I did not go looking to know him. On a block, you do not pick your neighbors. He was just there, a fixture, the kind of presence other men lowered their voices around. For a long time, all I knew of him was the reputation and the ink. Then one lockdown, when the whole tier was shut in for days and there was nothing to do but sit with your own head, I noticed him through the reflection off the tier glass, sitting on his bunk with a Bible open on his knees, not performing it for anybody, because there was nobody out there to perform for. That is when I started paying attention. A man reads different when the audience is gone. That was the first honest thing I saw in him, and it turned out to be the start of the whole change. The first one was 1 Peter chapter 2, the part that says, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own possession." And a little further down, "Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." You have to understand what a gang gives a man before you understand why that verse hit him so hard. It is not mostly about crime, it is about belonging. Most of the men I watched go into that life did not go looking for violence. They went looking for a family, a place where somebody had their back, a name bigger than their own to stand under, the gang cells belonging to men who never had any. That is the hook. That is the whole hook. So when this man read that he could be part of a people, chosen, claimed, belonging to something that did not require him to hurt anybody to stay in it, that reached the exact wound the gang had been feeding on, he told me once, real quiet, that he had spent his whole life being owned by something, and this was the first time he had read about belonging to something that did not want a piece of his flesh for the privilege. But I have to be honest about the verse, because it is easy to make it sound too clean. Peter was writing to scattered believers about their identity. He was not handing a man a new crew to replace his old one. The point was never to trade one gang for a holier gang. If a man leaves one group only to make his faith into the next thing he uses to feel powerful and better than everybody, he has not changed. He has just switched flags. I watched that happen too. Men who swapped a gang for a loud religion and stayed exactly as hard underneath. The belonging Peter is talking about is supposed to make you gentler, not give you a new set of colors to wear. And I watched how hard that pull was for him, because belonging does not let go clean. The old crew did not send him a letter releasing him. There were men on that same yard who still expected him to be who he had been, who read his quiet as a problem, who tested whether he was still theirs. Walking toward a new people meant walking away from the only people who had ever claimed him, and the claiming does not end just because you found a verse. He told me the loneliest stretch of his whole sentence was not before the change. It was right in the middle of it, when he had let go of the old belonging and had not yet felt the new one. That gap is where a lot of men turn back. He did not, but it was close, and he never once made it sound easy. The second verse is the one that dealt with his record, and this is where it got heavy. Isaiah chapter 1, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be like wool. Think about that word scarlet for a man with blood in his history. That is not a gentle image. Scarlet, crimson, red. That is the color of what he had done, and he knew it, and the verse does not pretend otherwise. It does not say your sins were not that bad. It says they are scarlet, and even so, they can be made white. That difference matters. Cheap comfort tells a man his past was not really so dark. This verse tells him it was exactly that dark, and mercy is still on the table. That is a harder thing to hear and a truer one. And I need to give you the part right before it, because people love to quote the snow and skip the setup. Just before that line, God tells them to wash themselves, to stop doing evil, to learn to do good, to seek justice, to defend the person being crushed. The scarlet to snow promise is sitting right on top of a command to change how you live and to go stand up for the people who get stepped on. The washing was never separate from the turning around. A man does not get the white as snow and keep running the same corner. The verse ties the mercy and the changed life together, and this man understood that. He did not treat the promise as a reason to relax. He treated it as a reason to become the kind of man who protects people instead of preying on them. Now let me stop, because this is where these videos usually cheat, and I will not. That man had victims, real ones. Whatever the ink meant, it meant somebody got hurt, and the mercy he found does not erase them. His becoming white as snow, if that is what happened, does not unhappen anything he did. It does not put anybody back together, and it does not put him above the people he harmed, and it does not obligate a single one of them to forgive him or trust him or ever want to hear his name. I want that said plainly, because a second chance is not a clean slate handed to the people who were on the other end of the first one. It is a chance to become different going forward. It is not a refund on the past. That leads into the third verse, because it is the one people misread the most. 2 Corinthians 5:17, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. The way that man first read it, and honestly the way I first read it too, was like an erase button. New creation, old gone, so the past is deleted, the record is wiped, start clean like it never happened. And then you run straight into the wall of reality, because the tattoos are still on your neck, the sentence is still on your paper, the memory is still in your head at 3 a.m, and the people who knew the old you have not forgotten a single thing. So what does it actually mean? Paul wrote that in the middle of talking about reconciliation, about people being brought back to God and given the work of bringing others back. New creation is not about your history getting deleted. It is about which direction you are now facing and who you now belong to. The old way of counting a man by his flesh, by his reputation, by his worst deeds, that way of counting is what passes away, not the facts of his life. The new creation man still remembers exactly what he did. He is just no longer ruled by it or defined only by it. That was a relief to that man, but a demanding one, because it meant he could not use new creation as a way to skip the hard work of facing what the old creation had actually done. The fourth verse is the one about fear, and I have to be very careful here, because leaving that life is genuinely dangerous, and I will not hand you a lie dressed up as faith. Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Leaving a gang is not like quitting a job. Depending on the group, walking away can be read as betrayal, and betrayal has a price. That man was afraid, and he had reason to be. So when he leaned on that psalm, I watched what it did and what it did not do. It did not make him safe. Let me say that clearly, because I have heard people tell dangerous lies about this. Faith is not a force field. That psalm did not promise him that nobody would ever come for him. Read the whole thing. And David is literally talking about enemies and armies camped around him. The psalm is not a man saying there is no danger. It is a man saying the danger no longer runs my life. Those are different. What that courage was for was not recklessness. It was so he could do the slow, unglamorous, sensible things a man has to do to step away and stay alive without being frozen by terror the whole time. Using whatever real and official protections existed, being patient, not making a dramatic show of leaving that would only get him hurt. The fear verse was not permission to be careless. It was permission to stop being ruled by fear so he could think clearly. And I want to say, if you are a person in that situation right now, courage is good and real help is also good, and the two are not enemies. A verse and a safety plan belong together. The fifth verse is the one that anchored the whole thing for him and for me watching him. It is not really a verse, it is a scene. Luke 23. The two men crucified next to Jesus. One of them mocks. The other one turns and says something that I think is one of the most honest sentences in the whole Bible. He looks at the mockery and says, "We are getting what our deeds deserve. We are under the same sentence, and we deserve it." And then he asks Jesus to remember him, and Jesus tells him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Sit with what that man said. We deserve this. He did not claim he was innocent. He did not blame the system or his childhood or the other guy. He was a condemned man who said out loud in his last hours, "I am getting what my deeds earned." And that is the exact moment mercy reached him. Not when he made excuses, when he stopped making them. That wrecked the man on my block, in a good way. Because the whole gang code, the whole prison posture is built on never admitting that. You minimize, you justify. You were forced. It was them. It was the situation. The thief on the cross did the one thing that world tells you never to do. He agreed with the verdict about himself and asked for mercy anyway. And he received it without the sentence being lifted. Notice that. He still died on that cross. The second chance he got was not a lighter sentence. It was mercy inside the sentence he admitted he deserved. That is a very different thing than the second chance most people are hoping for, and it is the realer one. The sixth verse is the proof, because everything before it can be faked, and both of us knew it. Galatians 5. Paul lists what he calls the works of the flesh, and you should read that list with a prison yard in mind. Enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, factions. That is not ancient language. That is a description of gang life, almost word for word. And then he lists the other kind of harvest, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Here is why that one mattered most. Paul calls the second list fruit. Fruit is slow. Fruit is not a costume you put on in an afternoon. It grows quietly over seasons, and you can tell what a tree really is by what it actually produces over time, not by what it says about itself. That is exactly how you tell a real change from a performance in prison. Anybody can carry a Bible. Anybody can learn the words in a week. The loudest converts on the block were often the ones nothing had actually changed in, and time always exposed them. What told the truth about this man was not his testimony. It was that a year later, 2 years later, the anger that used to run him came slower. The rivalries stopped interesting him. He did the patient thing when the old him would have done the violent thing over and over when nobody was watching and nobody was clapping. That is fruit. That is the only proof that ever counts. I saw one of those moments, and it stayed with me. Somebody disrespected him out in the open, the kind of thing that in his old life would have demanded an answer, and everyone nearby knew it, and a few of them were watching to see what he would do. The old him had a script for that moment, and everybody knew the script. He just did not run it. He let the words land, held whatever was rising in him, and walked. No speech about it. No announcement that he was a Christian now. He just did not take the bait, and then he did it again the next time and the time after that. On a yard, that costs you. It reads as weakness to the people still living by the old code. He paid that price quietly for years, and that steady, unglamorous refusal told me more than any testimony he could have given at a chapel microphone. So let me be plain about what these six can and cannot do, because I have watched men turn verses into promises they never made, and then break when the promise did not come. Know what these passages actually say, and they can turn a man around, turn them into guarantees, and they collapse by the first hard week. None of these got that man out early. None of them made him safe from the people he had left. None of them erased his victims or handed him anyone's trust. First Peter gave him belonging, not a new crew to feel powerful in. Isaiah gave him mercy, tied to actually changing, not a way to feel clean while staying the same. 2 Corinthians made him new-facing, not new with no history. Psalm 27 gave him courage, not a force field. The thief gave him mercy inside a sentence he admitted he earned, not a lighter one. And Galatians gave him a slow harvest that took years, not a costume. And I should say this was true where I was, my block, that facility, those years. Another prison runs its gangs and its faith differently, and I am not handing you the law of all prisons. I am handing you what I watched once, up close. The part that surprised me is how some of this got harder for him to hold as he got closer to release, not easier. Inside, the walls did half the work of keeping him away from the old life. He knew that out there, the old crew, the old corners, the old phone numbers would all still be there, and the fruit he had grown behind concrete was going to get tested in the open where nobody was making him choose right. A second chance inside a cell is one thing. A second chance in the same neighborhood that made you is a much harder thing, and he knew it, and he was scared of it in a way I respected. We talked about that more than once near the end of my time there. Inside, the fruit had grown in a kind of greenhouse. The walls kept the worst temptations on the other side of them. He understood that a real test was still coming, on a corner, at a number he still knew by heart, in front of faces that only remembered the old hymn. The verses that had carried him through concrete were going to have to carry him through a front door with no lock on his choices anymore. He did not talk about that like a man who had it beaten. He talked about it like a man who knew the hardest chapter had not been written yet. I respected that more than any victory speech, because a man who thinks the fight is over is usually the one who loses it. He was planning for the fight to keep going, which is exactly why I thought he might make it. Because the change was never one scene. It was reading 1 Peter and still feeling the pull of the only family he had ever known. It was believing Isaiah and then lying awake with the Scarlet still vivid. It was claiming new creation and catching the old creation looking back at him in a reflection. It was choosing the fruit, failing, and choosing it again the next day. The prayer mattered. But it was the next 1,000 ordinary choices, most of them boring, none of them filmed, that showed what the prayer actually meant. That is the part every dramatic testimony skips, and it is the only part that ever proves anything. So there are your six. Belonging that does not want your flesh in 1 Peter. Scarlet made white, tied to really turning in Isaiah. A new creation facing a new direction, still carrying its memory in 2 Corinthians. Courage that clears your head without promising you are safe in Psalm 27. Mercy for a man honest enough to say he deserved his sentence in Luke, and a slow harvest that proves by conduct what words can only claim in Galatians. 6 verses that gave a man who had belonged to the worst thing in his life a chance to belong to something else, and then made him spend years proving it. Let me ask you something real before I go. Is there a second chance in your life that you had to earn slowly by conduct long after somebody handed you the words for it? Not the moment you said you would change. The long, boring stretch where you actually did. Tell me down below. I read them. And next time, I want to sit with the hardest part of a story like his, the part that comes after the second chance, what the Bible actually says about making things right with the people you harmed when some of it can never be made right. Restitution and its limits, and what a man does with a debt he cannot pay. Because mercy and owing are not the same thing, and that man knew it better than anybody. But for tonight, I will leave you where I started, with a man whose skin still carried a record he could not scrub off, reading a book a few cells down from me. The word never once removed his tattoos, or his sentence, or his past. What it did was slower and bigger. It gave him somewhere new to belong, told him the truth about his Scarlet and washed it anyway, and then asked him to spend the rest of his life proving the change with his hands. The hardest verses were never the ones he could not understand. They were the ones he understood completely and still had to get up every ordinary morning and live.